There's something powerful about a dream that comes from God. It doesn't come through logic. It doesn't show up in a way that makes sense. It shows up in pieces. It's too big for where you are. It stretches you. It offends your current reality. And sometimes it even scares you. Because when God gives a dream, He's not speaking to where you are. He's speaking to who you're becoming. But here's the thing about sacred dreams. They don't need agreement from people who are still stuck in cycles you've already been delivered from. Small minds aren't always evil. They're just limited. They've been shaped by survival, shaped by disappointment, shaped by fear. And when you share a sacred dream with someone who hasn't yet broken the ceiling over their own life, they'll try to shrink yours. Not because they don't love you, but because they've never seen what you're describing. It sounds impossible to them. It sounds crazy. It sounds too much. And instead of saying, I've never seen that before, but I believe in you, they say, you should probably think smaller. Be realistic. Don't get your hopes up. But sacred dreams don't make sense. They don't fit in neat boxes. They don't ask for permission. They crash into your spirit and call you into uncomfortable places. And that calling isn't meant to be understood by everyone because it wasn't given to everyone. It was given to you. And when you hand it over to people who haven't cultivated the faith to carry something that big, they will either dismiss it, diminish it, or distort it, none of which helps you grow. You've got to know when to keep a dream in the soil. When a seed is first planted, you don't dig it up every day to show people what's coming. You let it stay buried. You let it sit in the dark. You let it stretch and crack and push through dirt while nobody sees what's happening, because that stage is fragile. That stage needs protection. And your dream is the same way. Just because you're excited doesn't mean it's time to share. There's a difference between celebration and exposure. If you share too soon, you expose your dream to atmospheres that weren't designed to grow it. And let's be honest, some people are not disappointed in your dream. They're intimidated by it because your obedience highlights their stagnation. Your faith confronts their fear. And instead of getting inspired, they get offended. They don't want to see someone do what they told themselves wasn't possible, so they start projecting limits onto you that were never meant for your life. And if you're not careful, you'll start shrinking something divine just to fit into a space God already called you out of. Your dream might be sacred, but it's still vulnerable. And in its early stages, it doesn't need a committee, it needs commitment. It needs your belief, your yes, your obedience, not their opinion. Because even well-meaning people can be wrong. Even people who love you can advise you from a place of fear instead of faith. You've got to stop measuring your vision against their capacity. God gave you the dream because only you could carry it through. That means you don't have to convince, you don't have to prove, and you certainly don't have to explain. There's a story in the Bible where Joseph, full of excitement, shares his God-given dream with his brothers. He sees greatness, he sees leadership, he sees elevation, but instead of receiving support, he receives jealousy. His dream triggers their insecurity, and that moment of sharing sets off a chain reaction that lands him in a pit, then a prison. Not because the dream wasn't real, but because the audience wasn't ready. It's a cautionary tale. Just because you see the dream doesn't mean you should share it, especially not with people who can only relate to where you've been, not where you're going. Dreams are delicate in the beginning. They're like a flame in the wind, and it doesn't take much to blow them out. A sarcastic comment, a dismissive laugh, a moment of silence when you expected celebration. Those things can plant doubt. And if you're not rooted, that doubt can grow faster than your faith. You'll start second guessing what God made clear. You'll start questioning the very thing that once had you leaping out of bed in the morning. Not because the dream changed, but because the atmosphere around it wasn't protected. That's why you've got to surround yourself with dream midwives, people who know how to sit in the delivery room of your purpose without comparing contractions. People who don't just clap when it's done, but cover you while it's growing. People who remind you who you are when your vision starts to blur. And until you have those people, it's okay to dream in silence. It's okay to build in the background. It's okay to let God develop it before you display it. Don't let small minds define your boundaries. Don't let limited vision rewrite your assignment. You are carrying something eternal, something generational, something that might not make sense now, but will shift atmospheres later. That kind of dream doesn't need popular support. It needs divine strategy. And divine strategy often looks like obscurity, like discipline, like being misunderstood, like being the only one who sees the blueprint. That's not a sign you're wrong. That's a sign you're walking by faith. You owe it to your future to protect what God planted. You owe it to yourself to guard what hasn't been built yet. Every dream has its moment, but that moment will only come if you keep nurturing it in the dark. Stay focused, stay planted, let the fruit speak when it's time, because one day the very people who questioned your vision will have no choice but to witness its fulfillment. Not because you argued, not because you convinced, but because you obeyed, even when the room was too small to understand what God was doing in you. There's something sacred about a wound. It doesn't matter how you got it, whether it came from betrayal, loss, disappointment, or the slow unraveling of something you thought would last forever. It marks you. And when you're bleeding, the natural thing to do is reach. Reach for help, reach for understanding, reach for someone who can sit in it with you and say, I see you, I get it. But reaching while you're still bleeding is dangerous, because you'll reach from a place of desperation, not discernment. And in that state, you're not choosing connection. You're grabbing onto whatever's close. Bleeding wounds need covering, not showcasing. There's a difference between telling your story from a scar and spilling it from an open wound. One is wisdom, the other is pain crying out for relief. And if you don't give yourself time to process, time to breathe, time to feel, you'll end up turning your wound into a stage when it was meant to be a sanctuary. Not everyone needs to see you mid-surgery. Some people only need to see the healing. Some people only need to see the strength that came after the brokenness, not the brokenness itself in its rawest form. Because bleeding invites bacteria. Bleeding invites contamination, not just physically, but spiritually. When you share too soon, you expose yourself to voices that aren't there to heal. They're there to judge, to question, to dissect, and their words don't soothe, they infect. Suddenly, the pain that was personal becomes public, and you lose control over something that was never meant to be handled by anyone but you and God. You wake up one day and realize your healing has been hijacked by opinions. Your story is no longer your own. It's become content for someone else's commentary. Sometimes silence is not avoidance, it's wisdom. It's protection. It's God saying, I'm still working on that part of you. Don't speak on it yet. Don't put it out there yet. Let me finish what I started before you start narrating it to people who won't understand the depth of what you went through. Because what hurt you most deeply may not even be explainable yet. And if you try to articulate it before you've even named it, you'll reduce it to something shallow, something the world can digest, but your soul still can't make sense of. You don't owe anyone a front row seat to your breakdown. And sometimes the most holy thing you can do is keep quiet, not because you're ashamed, not because you're hiding, but because some pain is too precious to hand over while it's still raw. You've got to learn how to bleed in the presence of God before you bleed in front of people. Because God doesn't mishandle pain. He doesn't turn your wounds into weapons. He doesn't use your hurt as a headline. He wraps it, he heals it, he anoints it. And when he's done, what once hurt you becomes the very thing that gives life to someone else. But only when the bleeding stops. Some of us are bleeding on timelines and stages and group chats and dinner tables, trying to find relief in exposure, but exposure is not healing. Attention is not medicine. The likes don't fix the loss. The sympathy doesn't mend the spirit. All it does is delay the work that healing demands. Because healing isn't a broadcast, it's a process. It's messy, it's layered, it's often lonely, and it doesn't always come with applause or affirmation. Sometimes healing looks like crying in the dark with nobody but God. Sometimes it looks like going silent because words can't hold what you're carrying. Sometimes it looks like walking away from people who would rather analyze your pain than pray for it. You have to know the difference between sharing and spilling. Sharing is intentional. Sharing has timing. Sharing has purpose. Spilling is uncontrolled. Spilling is impulsive. Spilling is driven by the ache to be seen, not the wisdom to be healed. And when you spill in front of the wrong people, they don't clean it up. They slip on it. They fall into their own dysfunction and project it onto you. Then you're left trying to manage both your pain and their perception. That's too much weight for someone who's already bleeding. Some wounds need time before they can be turned into wisdom. And if you rush that transformation, you dilute the power in your testimony. You water it down so it's palatable for others, but it loses its potency. The very thing God wants to use to set others free becomes a diluted version of the truth because it was shared too soon. That's why timing matters. That's why healing has to come before the testimony, because the impact is in the clarity. And clarity only comes when the bleeding stops. Even Jesus bled in private. In the garden, he wept, he groaned, he cried out to the Father. And while his disciples were near, they couldn't truly understand the depth of his agony. He didn't take his pain to the crowd, he took it to God. And when it was time, he bore the wound for others to see, but not until the purpose had been fulfilled. There's a pattern in that. There's a divine blueprint for how we're meant to carry pain with honor, not just emotion. So when you're wounded, ask yourself, am I speaking from a place of healing or a place of hemorrhaging? Because a hemorrhaging heart can't filter. A bleeding spirit doesn't know when to stop. It just pours. And not everyone you pour into is ready or worthy of receiving it. Some people will take your pain and make it their entertainment. Others will minimize it because it makes them uncomfortable. And some will even compete with it, turning your vulnerability into a battlefield instead of a place of healing. You deserve better than that. Your healing deserves better than that. Give yourself permission to heal in the hush. Let God do surgery without an audience. Don't feel pressure to explain what you're still processing. Don't try to articulate what your soul hasn't even digested yet. Some things need to stay between you and God until you're strong enough to speak on them without shaking. Until the tear in your voice has turned into authority, until your pain has been processed enough that it no longer leaks out as bitterness, but rises up as breakthrough. There's a sacredness to your struggle, a weight to your wounds. And sometimes we get so desperate for connection, so hungry for someone to just see us, that we end up handing our broken places to people who were never qualified to hold them. We give access to the most fragile parts of ourselves because we confuse vulnerability with recklessness. But baby, vulnerability without discernment is self-sabotage. Handing over the most tender parts of your soul to people who haven't even proven they know how to carry you when you're whole, let alone when you're bleeding. See? Some people love the idea of your transparency, but they don't have the capacity for your truth. They say, I'm here for you, but the minute your story gets too heavy, they drop you without warning. Not because they're evil, sometimes they just never saw the weight of what you were carrying. They weren't trained for it. And yet we hand them our traumas like they're therapists, our fears like they're pastors, our insecurities like they're healers. But you can't expect someone who hasn't built trust with you to be a safe space for your brokenness. There's this pressure today to be real and be raw and just tell your truth. And yes, there is power in owning your story, but not everybody deserves the whole book. Some people only need the summary. Some people only need the testimony after the healing, because if you give it to them while they're still figuring it out, they may twist it, misunderstand it, weaponize it, or even use it to define you in ways God never intended. That's why discernment isn't optional. It's essential. You got to know who can hold you without trying to fix you, who can listen without judgment, who can see the cracks and not run away from the mirror of their own brokenness in the process. When you share your weaknesses prematurely, it's like handing an open wound to someone with dirty hands. And not only do they not heal you, they infect you. Suddenly you're carrying shame that didn't even belong to you, doubt that wasn't yours, guilt that grew from someone else's inability to love you where you were. And now your healing has to take a detour, not because you weren't brave, but because you were careless with who you let into your sacred space. Jesus chose 12, but he trusted 3. He spoke to the crowds, but he bled in the garden with his inner circle. Even the Son of God understood that not everyone needs access to your agony. Not everyone deserves a seat at the table where your soul is still being restored, because if they haven't shown you, they can sit with you in silence. If they haven't proven they can love you without conditions, they don't get to hear the parts of your story that are still being written in pain. Some of us are bleeding in front of people who only showed up for the blessing. We're confessing to people who just want content. We're handing over secrets to people who are still figuring out how to honor their own. And then we wonder why we feel more broken, more exposed, more confused. It's not that you were wrong for being open. It's that you were open with the wrong one. You've got to stop mistaking availability for trustworthiness. Just because they're around doesn't mean they're safe. Just because they're curious doesn't mean they're committed. And just because they're quiet doesn't mean they're loyal. There's nothing wrong with needing support. We all do. But the kind of support you choose matters. Is it rooted in love or rooted in control? Is it founded in empathy or wrapped in ego? Because the person who's only listening to feel important is not the person who will protect your process. And the one who hears your weakness and thinks less of you doesn't deserve the wisdom that came from it. You've got to get selective about who gets the inside story. You've got to start guarding your growth with the same energy you used to guard your image. This journey you're on is not just about surviving, it's about stewarding. You are carrying more than just pain. You are carrying lessons, legacy, power. And sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is pause before you share. Ask yourself, has this person shown me they can handle depth without drowning? Can they carry truth without turning it into gossip? Do they correct with love or critique with pride? Because if they can't see your scars without questioning your strength, they're not the one to hold your wounds. God didn't create you to be a spectacle. He created you to be a sanctuary. And sanctuaries are not wide open. They are sacred spaces protected by purpose, covered by discernment, and guarded by the Spirit. So when you feel the urge to open up, take a breath. Don't speak from your ache, speak from your alignment. Make sure you're not trying to fill a void with validation. Make sure you're not mistaking attention for healing. Because the only validation that truly heals is the kind that comes from within, rooted in truth, anchored in God. There are some things that are meant to be shared, yes, but they're meant to be shared when you've healed enough not to bleed on people. They're meant to be shared when you can tell the story from a scar, not an open wound. And that takes time, that takes trust, that takes God. Let him show you who's safe, because the right people won't run from your weakness. They'll honor it. They won't idolize your strength. They'll walk with you in your surrender. And that's the kind of space where real healing begins. Family, can I be real with you tonight? I mean real. Because we live in a world that glamorizes oversharing, that tells us we've got to put every thought, every plan, every struggle on display just to be seen, just to feel relevant. But there's a difference between being transparent and being exposed. It's the difference between connection and compromise. And today I came to remind somebody, you are not required to hand over the sacred just to feel accepted. There are some things God gave you in the dark, some things he whispered into your spirit, some dreams, some healing, some boundaries that were never meant to be placed on the altar of public opinion. So today I'm going to talk to you about 4 things you should never share with anyone, not because you're hiding, but because you're protecting what's holy. Are you ready? Let's go there. You know, we live in a generation that loves to announce before it builds. We post the plan before we've made the progress. We talk about the destination before we've even packed our bags. And while some of that might look like confidence, if we're honest, it's really insecurity dressed up like strategy. It's the deep down need for validation for someone to tell us, yes, that's a good idea, before we've even taken the first step. But can I tell you something? Vision doesn't need applause. Vision just needs discipline. And if you're not careful, you'll share something sacred with someone who doesn't carry the capacity to protect it, let alone believe in it. There's some things God will show you in seed form. He'll whisper them into your heart, plant them in the soil of your spirit, and ask you to carry them. Not post them, not parade them, but protect them. And if you rush to reveal before it's ready, you might end up sabotaging something that God was still trying to grow. Just because it's real to you doesn't mean it's ready for them. And if you start building based on their approval instead of God's instruction, you'll create something that looks good but can't survive the storm. Think about how many ideas were killed in the womb of conversation, how many dreams were deflated by a look, a question, a sarcastic comment. Sometimes it's not even what they say, it's how they say it, the tone, the doubt in their eyes, the subtle hint that they don't see what you see, and suddenly what was vibrant becomes vulnerable. What was bold starts to shrink, not because it wasn't real, but because you handed it to someone who couldn't see past their own limitation. You expected support from someone who's still trying to build up their own courage. That's not evil, that's just human. But your dream isn't meant to be sustained by someone else's understanding. It's meant to be sustained by your obedience. We see this over and over in scripture. God calls people in quiet places. He gives instructions in isolation. When he spoke to Noah, he didn't give him a press release. He gave him blueprints. And Noah didn't post about the ark before he built it. He didn't get caught up trying to convince the crowd. He trusted what he heard in private, and he let the results speak for themselves. Because sometimes the manifestation is the only explanation people will understand. There's a time to talk, but there's also a time to move in silence. There's a time to testify, but there's also a time to till the soil, to stay low, to be faithful in the dark until God says it's time to step into the light. And just because you're excited doesn't mean it's time to announce. Your spirit might be leaping, but your strategy still needs maturing. Excitement is not the same as readiness. And when you reveal too soon, you invite warfare that your process isn't prepared for yet. There's a divine protection in privacy. Sometimes God keeps things hidden not to punish you, but to preserve you. Because when you're building something that's never been seen before, you don't need commentary, you need clarity. You don't need likes, you need longevity. And when you're obedient in the quiet place, God will show up in the open place. But you have to trust him enough to wait. You have to love the vision enough to protect it. And you have to believe in the promise more than you crave the platform. This isn't about fear. It's about stewardship. You're not hiding it because you're afraid it won't happen. You're covering it because you know it will. And some things are too holy to hand over before they're whole. Some breakthroughs need to marinate in silence. Some anointings need to grow in the soil of solitude. And if you're constantly leaking what God is still writing, you're robbing the process of its power. You're inviting voices into a space that only God belongs in. There's wisdom in discretion. Even Jesus didn't always reveal himself. He healed in secret. He performed miracles and told people, Don't tell anyone, because he knew timing was everything. He understood that just because something is true doesn't mean it's time. And if the Son of God was selective with his revelation, how much more should we be? So I need you to ask yourself, am I sharing this because it's time or because I want to be seen? Am I talking because I'm led or because I'm lonely? Because if the root of your announcement is insecurity, the fruit will be disappointment. But if the root is obedience, the fruit will be undeniable. Let the results speak. Let the manifestation be your microphone. Because when God finishes what he started in you, no one will be able to deny that his hand was on it. But until then, build in silence, pray in silence, grow in silence, protect the vision. Because it's not just a plan, it's a calling. And not everyone deserves access to what God whispered in your spirit.